All right, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker for tonight. Sally Moody is a licensed clinical social worker and clinical director with the Professional Enhancement Program, PEP. She received her undergraduate degree in social work from Mississippi College in Clinton, Mississippi, and her master's degree in social work from the University of Denver in Denver, Colorado. She has experience with chemical dependency case management and evaluating and monitoring medical professionals with the Colorado Physician Health Program. She previously worked with Pine Grove's Legacy Program developing, implementing, and treating addiction in adults age 55 and older. She began working at PEP in August 2015 and has served as clinical director since 2017. We are so very happy to have Miss Moody here tonight to present this very important topic of boundaries. Miss Moody, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and just being able to take time to listen and to consider the topic of boundaries. I definitely appreciate being asked to be here. And so, without further ado, I will get started. I love talking about boundaries, and it generally brings up a lot of thought and discussion, or maybe things that you hadn't thought about before. And so I really hope that the time that we have together is thought-provoking or challenges a way that you practice day to day. And we will have some time for questions at the end. So what we're going to go over in the talk, we're going to talk about dual relationships and what that means, what that looks like, what are they, what are some pitfalls of dual relationships. And then we're going to go over types of boundaries and things to consider. And then in talking about the types of boundaries, I hope to offer some ways that you can maybe implement different skills or different boundaries, or look at the way that you show up in your practice with your clients and patients to improve boundaries. So when we're talking about dual relationships, it's really looking at a situation where you know someone in two different contexts. So with the statement here, situations in which the professional functions in more than one professional relationship. So this might be someone that you is your dentist, but also you go to church with, or they coach your kids' soccer team. But it's knowing somebody in two different realms. And sometimes that can happen knowingly, where it's a known thing, where maybe somebody comes into your practice or your business and you realize right away, oh, I know them from somewhere else. Or this is somebody that I never knew needed help or was a professional in some kind of way. And then you find yourself knowing them in a different realm. And sometimes these can happen kind of out of the blue, like somebody comes into treatment and you don't recognize their name, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I went to high school with them, or oh, wait a minute, I know them from somewhere else. So again, these can happen simultaneously, so they take place at the same time as the therapeutic relationship, or after termination of the relationship. So let's say someone comes in and you're working with them in a therapeutic way, or you're monitoring them, and then let's say that monitoring relationship ends, or the therapeutic relationship ends, and you find yourself in need of emergent care or some other kind of care, and you're given a provider that you weren't expecting, and you find out, oh wait, we know each other. Or it could happen at the same time. So a dual relationship, it does not necessarily mean that there is a boundary crossing or boundary violation. And I'm going to get into a little bit about the definition between a violation and a crossing. And then I have here, so all dual relationships are at a minimum a boundary crossing only because there is knowledge of each other, but not necessarily that violation. Healthcare professionals really should not engage in a dual relationship with a client or a patient or former client or patient if there's risk of exploitation or potential harm. And so as we're talking about the types of boundaries, that should become a little bit more clear. And dual relationships are not strictly prohibited. So again, for example, let's say you're the coach of your kid's team wants to come in and see you for a procedure or some kind of professional assessment. There may not be direct prohibition against that, but it may not be a wise thing to do, to knowingly enter into that dual relationship. So one of the things that I have found is that the world is just becoming a smaller place. And so with social media, with who you may know and meet on social media, or especially if you're in a community, big or small, for a long period of time, I think a dual relationship might be inevitable, where you're in an area where, especially in Mississippi, it doesn't take a lot of asking questions to realize that you know some of the same people. And that may be the same in your communities, or especially if you've been in even a bigger city for a long time, that those dual relationships and who you know can become blurry. So in smaller communities, there are often limited resources, and those multiple relationships may be something that you really can't prevent. I think about too, for those that are in recovery, if you're practicing as a professional in a town or a setting, and then you're going to your own 12-step recovery meetings, you might run into people that you're treating, which then opens the door for a dual relationship. And it's not to say that these can't happen at all, but it does bring complexity, and then also just questions around how do you navigate that, and do you knowingly go into a dual relationship. So I would suggest avoiding dual relationships when at all possible. And it may be an occupational hazard that I have, that in the work here at PEP, we see a lot of people who have really gotten into trouble because of their dual relationships, or because they didn't think it was that big of a deal to befriend a client or do something outside of the norm with them, or maybe treat their own friend or treat their own loved one. So that creates a dual relationship. A provider who is providing direct medical care or any kind of care for a family member, that creates that dual relationship. So some things to consider would be, is the relationship necessary? Is this a situation where you're practicing as an emergency medicine physician and there's somebody that you know that comes in and they need immediate care and you're the only provider? That sounds like a necessary dual relationship to engage in. But if there's somebody else that you can refer them to, that might be the best thing. Is the relationship exploitative? Is there a risk of financial harm or sexual exploitation? Really being honest with yourself about, who does the relationship benefit? Is it the patient or the therapist, or is there some ulterior motive being sought after in creating a dual relationship? Could it damage the patient, thinking about what the worst case scenario is. A lot of times people will think, well, it hasn't been a problem. So I provide this care and it hasn't been a problem. I was actually presenting this material at a dental conference a few weeks ago, and the dentist, some of them talked about how they're trained to share personal information about themselves. They're trained to be friendly and maybe overshare a little bit, or carry on the conversation during the dental procedure. And so they had a little bit of a hard time thinking about this, because so much of what they're doing might be based on these dual relationships with having their personal friends come to their practice so that they can start to build that. But really being cautious with that perspective. Could it disrupt the friendship? Could it disrupt the therapeutic relationship? What are the potential problems in treating somebody that you know in another realm of life? And are you being objective? And I think that can be certainly a challenge of, can you really be objective in what you're providing if you know the person in a different realm? And being honest with yourself about that. Question number 7, is this something that you feel comfortable documenting in the record about why you chose to lean into a dual relationship versus referring the person to someone else? And then even looking at what conversations might need to happen before a dual relationship occurs. So if it is something that you're not expecting, or you show up somewhere and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I know this person, is there a conversation to move forward so that both parties are aware? So there are some unintended actions and consequences. So the loss of objectivity, if you think about, providing care for a loved one, are you really able to be objective as you would if it's somebody that you don't know? Or are you going to give them special treatment or favoritism? Are you going to make assumptions about that person? I think about 2 times that I've heard providers talk about treating their friends, and some of the difficulties in that I think about a friend who is seeing, let's say, somebody they've known forever, and they go in to see them as their primary care physician. The friend may not feel super open and comfortable sharing all the details of the medications that they're on or behaviors they've get engaged in the past. Maybe they feel embarrassed to share everything. So maybe even the patient might withhold in disclosing information for fear of what maybe what the provider is thinking about them. And so just causing a lot of blurriness in that. There could be a loss of trust, money, relationship, and so there could also be a lot of feelings involved with that. So I think about an example of, let's say, a provider is seeing a friend, and the friend says, "Hey, I can't afford to pay you," or "Can you please just not charge me this time?" And the friend who is the provider may feel compelled to do that, which over time could build a lot of resentment and frustration. I would also really encourage you, if you are a licensed professional practicing in any profession, I really would encourage you to look at what your code of ethics has to say about this, because some do say more specifically to really try to avoid a dual relationship if at all possible. So looking at what your safeguards are in your practice, and that could be, looking at, is there a policy? Is there some kind of discussion that is being had around this. I was talking to somebody the other day who they provide medication management and are very clear that if a spouse of one of the patient, so you've got the provider, if that patient says, hey, I'd love for you to see my spouse, you've done such great work with me, can you please see my family member or my spouse? That the provider is very clear with the boundary to say, no, I cannot. That would be entering into a dual relationship. And so here's another provider's name. So having that discussion within your own practice about what are we going to do if there is a potential for a dual relationship. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of these types of boundaries here, but again, being very clear about what are the practice policies with dual relationships and making sure your staff is aware of this and really looking at what your motivation is for the dual relationship. So some people, think, well, I am a practitioner in a smaller area. People really have to travel, a couple hours to go to a different provider. I'm the only one that can provide this. And really being able to question that, because it may not be worth engaging in the dual relationship if that is the motivation. Looking at if you're able to hold yourself accountable and staff accountable, is there a plan around this? Like I was saying, the provider who was asked to see a family member of a patient, and what is a response? Making sure that you're keeping the boundaries. I can't say enough about consulting and having trusted colleagues that you can trust to be able to talk about this, or to run a scenario by them to see what they think. And not picking someone that is just going to tell you what you want to hear, but actually somebody who is going to challenge you and kind of get you to think about these things. And also listening to your own justifications. So are you saying to yourself, well, I'm the only one that can provide this care, I'm really the best one to do this, or there really isn't anybody, they do have to drive so much further, I'm the only one covered by their insurance. So really being able to listen to your own justifications around this. So in shifting a little bit to talk about boundaries, and as we talk through the types of boundaries, we'll be able to incorporate some examples of dual relationships. It's really looking in the line in the sand that represents the edge of appropriate and professional conduct. And so with our boundaries, it's not always clear. It's not always a defined black and white thing. Sometimes it's more of a gray. And being able to navigate the nuances of when it's a gray boundary. For many licensed professionals, there are some very black and white guidelines. And again, I would encourage you to look at your code of ethics and licensure requirements with your state licensing board, because they do have some very clear black and white boundaries set for us. But then a lot of the boundaries that we're going to be talking about are in that gray area and depend on the content and the context and the population that you're working with, and may not be a hard and fast guideline. So when we're talking about boundaries too, we're looking at any kind of fiduciary relationship and a power dynamic. So patient to doctor, student to teacher, employee to employer, parishioner to clergy. So anyone that has the license in the room or has the power in the dynamic, there needs to be very clear boundaries. One of the things that is really important to look at is the level of risk associated when you do have a license, and the level of power, and not minimizing the level of power that we have as a licensed professional. I hear a lot from people that they want to have an equal playing ground, and they want to be on an equal footing with their employees or their parishioners or their staff or their patients. And that really takes away from the inherent power that one has when they hold a position of power. And that thinking of, well, we're just equal in this, really is a risk of boundary crossings when that power is ignored or minimized. So some boundary crossings, we're going to talk about just the difference between a boundary crossing and a boundary violation. A boundary crossing is a minor deviation from whatever the norm is. It's possible that it may enhance the relationship and foster a treatment or therapeutic approach. It's a benign departure, so kind of fleshed out as we get into examples. But a minor deviation might look like sharing personal information about yourself, like one thing that normally you wouldn't share about yourself with your clients, but in this particular case, for this clinical purpose, there is a reason for that. And the goal is not to exploit the patient or the client. The boundary violation is looking at what causes harm to the client. And it typically does cause harm. There is some kind of exploitation involved, whether that's financial, psychological, sexual. It is serving the practitioner's desires and the practitioner's benefit, and it is not serving the best interest of the client. So I think about, here we do not share a lot about ourselves personally. There is no personal information around, like no personal pictures. I'm not telling our clients or patients about myself. But if I were to, I have told them some in the context of a specific situation, one place that I've worked in the past, and for the purpose of enhancing that conversation and being able to let them know, hey, I understand this component. If I were to go into a group therapy and talk about all the things going on in my life and solicit their feedback and process that would be a gross violation, because I would be using that power in the relationship to meet my need, not to foster their needs. So some considerations with boundaries, looking at, do you have the ability to say no? With the population that you're working with, are you able to say, not right now? Are you able to say, no, that is not something I'm able to do? And if you struggle to say no, really looking at why and what is underneath that. So a lot of times too, a violation does not just come out of thin air, that a lot of times there are small boundary crossings that lead up to a violation. That's not to say that a violation can't happen very quickly, but it seems more of the norm that it's boundary crossings over time that then lead to a violation. Again, not minimizing the power that you have in the dynamic with people that you're monitoring or treating or working with, and to hold that very dearly. It is a privilege to be able to practice as a licensed professional, and we want to do everything that we can to make sure that we're honoring that by following boundaries. One of the things too, and this ties into the dual relationship, is just kind of having a more conservative view that our clients are not a part of a friend pool. They are not a part of a dating pool. And so just having that, pretty much very rigid boundary around that can save people a world of hurt, by just not even seeing clients or your patients as somebody that you're going to become friends with or date. And what I would say about boundaries too is that it doesn't remove the temptation. So there have been many patients that have come through here that I think that's a really interesting person, and I would have loved to have met them anywhere else but PEP. And I could see myself and this person being friends at some point, but it works much better to have that clear boundary. And again, it's not to say that you're not going to be tempted, but again, that's where having the clear boundary, having people to talk to, having a good team around you really becomes important. And again, I think because of what I do, I have a much more conservative view of this, and I would encourage you to look at your code of ethics, but to think about once a client, always a client, once a patient, always a patient. And so that very clear boundary can really help prevent future problems. So if I'm thinking about, okay, once I have treated somebody, from here on out, they are no longer an option as a friend, as anything other than a patient. And sometimes people can have a struggle with that seems like too conservative of a view. And again, I think I've just seen so many problems when people have not adhered to this that I put it out there. So there are a couple TV shows that do not promote great boundaries that I wanted to make sure to tell you about. One is The Shrink Next Door. This was a podcast, is a podcast that was out a few years back. And then this picture here in the middle from Apple TV. So Paul Rudd and Will Ferrell are in this show, and it's a one season, several episode series. It really is a great watch because it's based on a true story, The Shrink Next Door, where the psychiatrist, Paul Rudd's character, really exploits and grooms Will Ferrell. And so it's a great watch in being able to see how over time the grooming behaviors happen, very exploitative relationship. Not sexual, but exploiting the patient for who he knows and having a house in Hamptons and having money. And it really is a great depiction of that. So that is a great listen and watch. The other that is on Apple TV is Shrinking. Again, if you haven't seen this, it's a fun watch. It follows a group therapy practice, and their boundaries are abysmal. And I keep waiting and watching for somebody, one of their patients or one of them to make a board complaint and how they navigate this, because it's a very incestuous, and the dual relationships are all over the place. One of the therapists has a patient live in their home. It's just a mess. So again, watch it with that in mind, that this is not a demonstration of good and healthy boundaries. This is a demonstration of like when boundaries are quite layered, and I would not recommend these boundaries. This is what I'm saying. So you might be at risk of crossing a boundary if you have a hard time saying no, if you find yourself doing something out of the norm for a certain patient or a certain client, if you're seeking emotional support from your patients, if you're deviating from what the norm is. And again, that's not to say that there can never be a deviation, but is it a clinical reason that maybe you're documenting, and that is a very clear clinical reason for the patient that is needed. Curbside consults. I think about, are you seeing people maybe in the grocery store, seeing a patient or a client in the grocery store, and they say, hey, I need to ask you this question about my care. Are you able to say, I can't talk to you right now, or this needs to wait for a meeting in the office? Are you disclosing personal information about yourself, expecting the same back? So if you share about yourself, really looking at why am I sharing this information, and are you expecting reciprocal interaction? So some other thoughts, and these are those justifications that I was speaking about. If you find yourself thinking, well, I'm only seeing this person because I'm the only one that can help them. I'm only giving them a break because, who else is going to do that? She really needs somebody to talk to right now. He really needs somebody to talk to right now. If you're thinking, what could go wrong? That might be a red flag that you might want to slow down and consult with somebody. If you're even in this presentation, if you are thinking, well, this information doesn't apply to me, I'm just here to get a CE credit, or I'm just whatever with this presentation. If you're thinking this doesn't apply to me, that is a red flag, because we are all, including myself, we are all susceptible to boundary crossings, boundary violations. And which is why we're even having this conversation, is to be able to challenge the boundaries that you have and to look at what does that look like in where you're practicing and what your setup is. So some other considerations around boundaries: we teach people how to treat us. So with our boundaries, we are constantly communicating something. Even without our boundaries, we're constantly communicating something, either with our nonverbal communication, or what we're verbally saying, or how we're dressing. And so we are teaching people what is okay with us and what is not okay with us. And so the example that I use is, I don't put out the vibes here that I want to be hugged, or that we're hugging here at PEP. We are not hugging at PEP. And so I also know how I could behave to promote hugging. And so it's looking at how do you show up for yourself in maintaining boundaries, and what message are you sending? So with this statement here at the bottom too, I think that there is a way that we can establish boundaries with listening to what the request is, and listening for the need, providing an empathetic response, and then offering an alternative solution. So if, let's say, you have a friend that comes to you and says, hey, I really value you as a friend, and I know that you're a great provider. Can I be your patient? A way to respond to that is, I'm so flattered. Thank you so much. That is such a huge compliment that you would want me to provide that care for you. I am so sorry, but I really value our friendship. I cannot see you, but I know somebody who is great, and here's their number. I'd be glad to reach out to them and see if they can meet with you or work with you. But being able to set the boundary in an empathetic way and providing the alternative solution. So if you're somebody that is asked this question a lot, being able to kind of have this in your back pocket to be able to give a solution and an alternative. in order to maintain the original relationship, that however that came to be, whether that's a friend or a colleague, etc. So as we start to talk about the specific types of boundaries, to keep in mind that content and context is highly dependent and make around this topic, and that will, I'll share some examples of that as we move through these. Looking at what your own motivation is in the boundaries, and then keeping in mind what your client population is or your patient population. And I'll give some examples of that as we move on. And I'll say this too, that what a boundary that might be like really clear for me in where I work here may be different for you with your environment that you work in. So for example, with the hugging, we shake hands here at admission and discharge. We're not touching in any other way. But if I were to work with children, that might look different, where if they kind of run up and hug you, I've heard that some in talking about this with teachers, or pediatricians even. You can't help sometimes if a kid just kind of runs up and gives you a hug around the legs, or if you're working in hospice, or even working in a hospital where you've been taught to touch somebody's hand for comfort, or maybe the top of their foot if they're laying in the hospital bed. So as we go through the types of boundaries, kind of keeping that in mind. So hopefully that'll make a little bit more sense as we go. So these are the type of boundaries we're going to go through. With your internal boundaries, really being curious about yourself, about why am I wanting to do this? Why am I wanting to share this information? Why am I wanting to give money to this person? And being curious about your behavior and about yourself before engaging in the behavior. Maybe looking at the core belief around the relational dynamic. So if your thought is, we are equals, that the doctor patient or provider patient, we are equals, so these boundaries really don't matter. That's a core belief to think about and look at how that might impact your boundaries. Are you getting your own needs met in the work that you're doing with the client population that you are? And I'll say I don't think that it's wrong to have some kind of sense of validation in your work. And we spend most of our time at work. And so I don't think that that's a bad thing. But looking at, are you getting all of your validation through work? Are you getting all of your validation and affirmation through your patients or clients? And are you doing your work in order to heal your own past trauma? And there are a lot of people in the mental health field, in the physician world and the provider world, that they are in the jobs that they are in because of a past experience. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing. I think we all have a reason for why we do what we do. And looking at, is this because of trying to heal something in a kind of a sideways manner? Looking at time. So with the boundary of time, are you starting on time? Are you ending on time? Are your meetings going over? Are you giving a preferred time to a special client? So let's say a coveted time for an appointment is 5:30 at night, or 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, so somebody doesn't have to take off work. Are you finding that you're giving those times just to special people? Are you doing a lot of phone calls in between sessions? And so, again, with the time boundary, if it is the norm for where you're working to see people at 10 o'clock on a Saturday, that's not the problem. The problem is looking at, are you stepping outside of that for certain clients or patients? With the professional role, again, being able to really look at the person that you're providing care for in whatever setting is not a friend, it's not a family member, it's not a business partner, it's not using those people to become a business partner or a colleague, but really being very clear about this is the role. Looking at how you're addressed and how you address the client also is a part of this professional role. So not using nicknames or pet names or going consistently by, this is what I'm called. And really a lot of this is making sure that you're not taking something that is professional and making it more casual. And that can be part of that boundary crossing when you find that might be happening. I'll say too about the professional role that some of this could be cultural. And so I think about in South Louisiana, everybody is baby. And so it's baby this and baby that. And if a provider were to go in and say, maybe to an elderly patient, don't call me that, like, I don't know that that's going to go over so well. And so there's that type of context too, the cultural components to be thinking about in that. But if you're finding somebody that you're providing treatment for attractive and you're calling them a pet name or calling them baby and whatever it is, that could be more of a red flag. Self-disclosure, this is really looking at what information do you disclose about yourself to the people that you work with, that your patients or clients, not necessarily your coworkers, but that is a good question. Looking at what information they know about you, why do they know this information about you, why do you want to share certain information about you, and then is it something that you would document in the records? So let's say you're working with someone and you're trying to convince them to take a certain medication, and maybe this is a medication that you also take, and to build rapport and show your own humanness, you say and disclose that you're taking that same medication and why you're taking that medication. Is that something that you would later document? And I would offer in terms of a suggestion that you can share a lot with your clients and population, and they don't necessarily need to know how you know that. So you could say, things about your experience with a certain topic without providing that personal information about yourself. There's also the component of social media where you really want to look at what you're disclosing on social media and who has access to that. And we'll go into a little bit more detail here in a few minutes about that. But social media is a way that we self-disclose about ourselves, and not to assume that your patients or your clients don't have access to that. And are you posting things on social media that you really would not want your coworkers or your clients or patients to see? I would say too about this, we're always disclosing something with our nonverbal communication, with our body posture, with what we're verbally saying, and paying attention to that as well. When you're in a session or in a meeting with a patient or a client. Looking at your setting. What does your setting say about you? Do you have a lot of pictures of where you vacation, or of your family, or of pets, or religious symbols? Are you meeting people outside of a traditional office or outside of a practice setting? So, having scheduled meetings, in the parking lot at Walmart or the grocery store, because that's where they need to be. Or are you agreeing to meet people at their place of work and taking that deviation from what is the norm? So really looking at what place says about you. In having this conversation with the dentist a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how, I think one of the providers had pictures maybe of a vacation, but they weren't really paying attention that they were seeing lower socioeconomic patients, and really looking at what message did that communicate to the patients to see the provider like on this vacation, and how the patient might feel seeing that. So that's another thing to think about too when it comes to place and the decor in your office or pictures that you have around, putting yourself in the shoes of your clients to say, okay, I wonder what they would think about this. Because what you may be wanting to communicate in your setting may not be what is received. So the same with gifts. So giving and receiving gifts, looking at what gifts are you giving? Do you give gifts? It does create a sense of obligation, and maybe if you have given a client a gift, they may feel like they need to give you something back. Looking at what is the meaning of the gift, and so what may seem of little value to you may be of great value to them. And again, I think that this is one place where the context and the comes into play. So a family medicine provider who's been treating a patient in a family for years, and the older woman brings in this beautiful quilt that she has worked on to give to the provider. The provider can't say, "Oh, don't bring me your quilt," but that does bring up a discussion about what do you do with that? What do you do with gifts? And again, making sure that you're looking at what your workplace policy is around receiving gifts, around giving gifts. Is it something that can be displayed maybe in a staff room where everybody can enjoy it? And just kind of knowing what your plan is around those gifts. I think what can also can be problematic is if it's a gift that maybe only goes to one person in the office, and then others don't get to enjoy that gift, and feelings that could come up around that. So physical, again, looking at how are you touching your participants? Is it a handshake? Is it the double-handed handshake? Is it a hug? There are lots of different types of hugs. Just kind of around the shoulder, or an A-frame hug, or a full body hug. Really looking at why you're wanting to touch the other person. Is it more to help yourself feel better, or have they asked for a touch? The thing about touch too is that we don't always know what touch means to the other person. So you don't know if that person has had a sexual abuse history or trauma, or maybe they're just not somebody who touches and wants to be touched. So being able to make sure that we're not making an assumption about levels of touch, or that the client or the patient is wanting that. And again, looking at what your clothing says about you. Are you coming in all wrinkled, or with stuff, coffee drip down your shirt, or dirty clothes, or smelly clothes, or are you dressing in a professional sense? Again, this is also something that we're always communicating about with what we wear. with moving out of the physical, and we have just a few more slides and then we'll have some time for discussion. The levels of professional sexual misconduct. And so how this can happen can take place over a short period of time, or it can take place over a long period of time. But it can look like inappropriate conversations, inappropriate sexual banter. It can look like, oh, well, sexual banter and sexual joking is just what we do here. It's not that big of a deal. But then over time, one thing might lead to another. Inappropriate texting, and then the violations where it becomes any kind of sexualized touch or anything the practitioner is doing for their own sexual gratification with a client or a patient. Some of the slippery slope behaviors around professional sexual misconduct, not taking care of oneself professionally, having kind of the boundaries erode over time, having a more casual workplace where sexual banter or sexual joking is okay. The grooming behavior. So grooming behaviors, I could probably spend a whole presentation on what grooming behaviors are. Grooming doesn't necessarily have to be for a sexual end, but with professional sexual misconduct, it tends to be that way, where the grooming is showing special treatment or favors to that person in the hopes that one day it might become sexual. And then again, over time, maybe with a time boundary, maybe you're seeing this person after hours when nobody else is around. You're being flirtatious. Maybe you're planning to see this person more often than they really need to be because you want to see them more. And then engaging in sexual misconduct. And I would say too that there are certainly some people that start out a relation or start out a boundary crossing with the hopes of a violation. So seeing a patient or a client that they find attractive and knowingly pursuing them for a sexual end. And then there are some crossings that start and dual relationships that might start that they start out with no real intention of it being sexual, but then over time that happens. So a couple other types of boundaries here, and we will wrap up the lecture portion here. Looking at what your boundaries are around money and payment and bartering for services. So is your structure set up to where it is very clear what the payment for service is? Are you exchanging services for services, or is it primarily sticking to the policy around money? So this could look like not charging people for sessions or charging certain people at a lower fee because you know them or because you feel sorry for them. And really making sure you're establishing what the boundary is and the expectation is at the beginning of the therapeutic or professional relationship. So with social media, looking at kind of what your boundaries are around social media. Should you have social media? What platforms do you need to have? Should you have these platforms? Are they good for you? Are they good for your recovery if you're in recovery? Looking at how social media may blur boundaries. One of the things that I commonly hear is that, well, I need social media to have a professional stance and position, that the Facebook page that I have for my office really does benefit me professionally with building my caseload or my patient load and patient base. But then looking at who's managing that, and is it connected to a personal site, and how are you navigating the boundaries around it? So some other things that I've heard too, patients sending a direct message through Instagram or Facebook to be able to ask for a refill or an appointment, and what is the boundary or response in that. Being able to acknowledge too that not all of your colleagues are going to have the same boundaries that you do, and if you do a simple Google search, you will find that there are breaches of confidentiality professionally all the time with social media. Either people posting pictures in a hospital setting where patient information is seen in the background, or just people disclosing things unknowingly or knowingly. And I mean, I think about the hospital where I work here. We have a few pages that just go over what the policy is around how you are to behave with social media. One of the things too that I think can be a thought around social media is that, well, this is my right, this is a freedom of speech. But I don't know that it really is, because once you are a licensed professional and are out there practicing, you don't just stop doing that when you leave work. And I think about it like, just because I'm married and I take my wedding ring off, that doesn't mean I stop being married. And in the same sense, it's the same here with boundaries. So, how I show up in social media, or if I show up in social media, like that is also going to be seen through the lens of me being the clinical director here at PEP. So it's one of the things to be thinking about with professionalism and social media. So some do's and don'ts, and then we'll have time for questions. So know and understand what your regulations are. Again, what your code of ethics is, what your employee handbook has to say about it. Be honest about what you're posting. Maybe if you've got social media, look at having either a nickname, not having your full name out there, just to provide a little bit more protection or privacy for you. Proceed with a lot of caution about what you put out there, because even if you delete it, it's not necessarily always gone. I would encourage you to Google yourself, see what's out there about yourself, or ask a trusted friend to see what they can find. Making sure to watch for stress and burnout. When we're stressed and when we're burned out, we may not adhere to our boundaries as closely as we need to. Looking at whether or not you need separate accounts, if you need a personal and a professional. I think that, especially this day and age, I think we can expect people to be curious about us and to Google us and to see what they can find out. And so again, just really, this is not to say, oh, you should not have social media, but really to be cautious and to be thoughtful about it. So some don'ts: don't initiate contact with a patient or a client. Don't send them a friend request or a message. Don't take photos or videos of people at work or with confidential information in it. You certainly don't want to post any identifiable information. I would encourage you not to Google your patients for a number of reasons. One, you're looking at building a trusting relationship with the patient or client, and you might find something about them when you Google them that you weren't expecting, and then what do you do with that information? Do you say to them, hey, I Googled you and this is what I found? Maybe that's a conversation to say, hey, let's Google you together, or having that conversation before you actually do it. And then really avoiding any kind of conversation or communication over a social media platform that they're not HIPAA compliant. and to really avoid that way of communicating with your patients or your clients. So I think I'm finished with the lecture portion, and I'm glad to answer questions.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Moody. This has been very informative, really, really good presentation. I encourage folks to put questions, comments in the chat, or if you want to, please raise your hand, and then we can unmute and ask the question. We do have a question here, and I actually, frankly, have a couple thoughts about it too. So, but how would you evaluate the boundary issues in this hypothetical? I've been treating a patient for severe depression and personality issues for past year. The patient is now having problems at work. His employer is now requiring that his behavioral health clinician provide a note on whether he's fit for duty. The patient asked me for the requisite note.
So normally at this point, I would say, what would you think? and I think that thinking about, one, is that something that you're really comfortable doing? And I guess a question that I would have too is the note going to the patient for the patient to give to the workplace, or is it going directly from the provider to the workplace? If it's going directly to the workplace, you'd need a release of information to be able to provide that. But I would also have a conversation with the patient about, like, if we're signing a release of information for the workplace, what limits are there and parameters are there with what can be shared? Because it may open up a door of sharing a lot more information about the patient's mental health than the patient is anticipating. So that would be one thought. Are you comfortable doing that and being the person on record to say, yes, this person is cleared, and you're putting your stamp of approval that person is safe to be working or doing what they're doing. And I would think too, like, is that something that you're normally doing in your day-to-day practice, writing letters like that? And if there is a letter to be written, is there, sometimes what we've done here is we've said, we can write a letter, but we're not going to say exactly what you want us to say. We're going to give our clinical opinion, and it may not be what you're wanting it to be.
Yeah, I got to say that's a very interesting question, and for folks that are working in physician health programs, we definitely come up against that very often. How do we kind of respond to those things? Very interesting, and can be very difficult, most definitely.
Right, and that is the challenge. Like, this is the gray. So there's not a clear, black or white issue. I'm looking at the question now. So, one of the things too, I would wonder, does this patient, does their employer have an employee assistance program? Because they may be able to go through the employee assistance program and have that person talk with you as the clinician, and have the employee assistance program evaluate, from a more objective position, if they're safe to be working.
And I think that this may also be, again, a place where a physician health program could be,
yes,
useful too.
Absolutely. I was thinking that maybe this was not a physician.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only reason, but yes.
Yeah.
That's
true. Yes. I'm always thinking about physicians. I'm sorry.
But yes, calling the professional health program or the physician assistance program in your state, because there are a number of PHPs that will monitor other professionals. So that's a great reminder too.
Yes. Other questions, other thoughts. The one other response here is I'd suggest they get psychological testing to determine what level of cognition they're currently functioning at. I would let them know why I'm suggesting it.
Mm-hmm.
So that definitely, I think that those issues are definitely interesting and sometimes a real can of worms.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think to that, and just kind of looking at the question again, and I'm not asking for this information in this, but what is the job, and are we talking about someone that is not a safety sensitive profession, someone that would be more of a low risk? I don't know if that's the best word to use, but to be working, or is this a safety sensitive professional? Is this a teacher? Is this somebody who really could benefit from a physician health program or further evaluation? But I think about it in the context of the boundary discussion. Is this even something that you feel comfortable doing?
Yes. Thank you. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Again, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. I guess I did have one maybe observation / question. I wonder about things like a provider's own trauma, stress, burnout. I think that must make us even more vulnerable to boundary violations when we're managing all of that. And I'm assuming you probably have seen that, but I don't know if you've got some other thoughts about that.
I think a lot of times, professionals are hardworking, struggle to say no, maybe workaholic, and no in particular profession, but driven. Especially people that are in the helping profession, they go into a helping profession so they can help people, and that can be quite taxing. And then sometimes it's a lot easier to help other people than to think about how you might help yourself. And I think that can lead to a lot of stress and burnout, depending on the type of system that you work in. If it's a system that wants you to do more and more and more, or to do more with less, or continues to pile on things, and that stress increases, then I think that's where the boundaries can be a problem. So part of it is having a self-awareness of when do I know that I need a break? When do I know I need a vacation? When do I need to think about, is this job the best one for me? And am I doing right by the population with what I'm doing? And I think burnout, there are over 100 symptoms of burnout. Burnout can bring apathy. And so it may be that you get to a point where if you're burned out and you're thinking, well, I don't care. I don't care what consequences this brings, or I don't care what, my patients do. That could lead to like loosening of the boundaries. And I think there's a professional component of knowing that about oneself. And when do you know that you're more likely to loosen those boundaries? Not necessarily a boundary crossing, but I know by Friday afternoon, my ability to say no and really stick with the boundary, it becomes a little bit harder.
Yes, absolutely. We have another question here. How does limited exposure of oneself facilitate treatment?
Can you rephrase that question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, this was asked by Dr. Hildreth. Dr. Hildreth, did you want to unmute and ask the question, maybe give a little bit more context?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that comes up in a lot of talks, and by the way, your talk is very meaty, and it had so many what seem to be minor aspects. You could talk for a lot of hours on it because it's so important. But I think sometimes we think of the do's and don'ts of disclosing information about ourselves. And if we think of it in terms of rationale, and if we think of it in terms of how does it facilitate treatment, then it allows one to be sort of meaningfully flexible in terms of what is best for the treatment process and the patients to disclose and what is best not to disclose. I mean, I guess I'm thinking of the kinds of things that happen in the physician's health program where we're not really treating the patients so that we can be a little more flexible in what we reveal about ourselves and about the program, because that can make it easier for them to then participate in a treatment situation down the road. And so that would be the rationale that you would do it. I don't know if that makes my question a little clearer.
It does. And what I was thinking about is it depends on what your role is and who you're talking to and like what the setting is. And it's looking at like what is it, what are the pieces of information that you do feel comfortable sharing about yourself, knowing that kind of once the information is out there about yourself, they might tell other people, and is that okay? Or if they start to ask you more questions to get more detail about you, are you okay with that? Or are you okay shutting that down and setting the boundary to say, I don't feel comfortable sharing those details. And so it's not to say you cannot share anything about yourself. That is not the message that I hope to give, but to really look at what's your motivation in sharing. In my role here, we're not sharing things about ourselves because we're trying to give them a quality product when if they know something personal about me, it's not going to matter at all about like their treatment, because then that becomes the focus versus what I'm trying to help them with. And we see people here that struggle with professional boundaries, so we're trying to model that we can give that treatment and they know nothing about us, and we can still give good treatment. But that may look really different in the role that you're in, and it may be helpful at times to share certain things about yourself to help kind of get a buy-in or to help facilitate that treatment.
Yeah, in some ways, the rationale would be if you tell things about yourself, then essentially you're cheating the patient from talking about themselves.
Yes, correct. I think about that sometimes when I have gone to the doctor or to the dentist, and they're just going on and on about stuff, questions that I'm not asking. I'm not asking a question about them personally, and they're sharing. And again, the lens and the view that I have is different because of what I do for work. But it's always interesting how much information they will personally divulge. And I'm like, I did not come to the doctor to hear about you. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Great question. Thank you. Any more questions? Anything else that anybody would like to ask or say? All right. Well, thank you so much. I want to say before we wrap everything up, just a bit about the CME. A questionnaire, a link rather to a questionnaire will go out tomorrow, no later than Thursday. Please respond to that questionnaire, complete it, and within 5 to 7 business days, remember there is a holiday, 5 to 7 business days, then you'll get the CME certificate. But tonight, thank you so much, Moody, for being here, for this great presentation. I think it's really, packed with a lot of very powerful information. Want to remind folks that we did record, and it will be on our YouTube channel. So if you missed any pieces of it, if you want to refer it to friends and colleagues, please do. Boundaries obviously is an incredibly important topic in practice. So want to send a lot of gratitude to you, but also thanks to everybody in the audience. Thanks everyone for being here, for supporting the Lemons to Lemonade lecture. We look forward to our next lecture, which will be in September with Dr. Greg Hobelman of Ashley Treatment Center, and look for notices about registration for that in August. I want to say to please continue to support us by attending our lectures. Also, please consider a donation to the center. Your donations, your support, all very, very important. So everybody have a great, great summer, because we will see you in September, though I'm sure it'll still be hot because that's just kind of how our climate goes. Yes, happy 4th of July to everybody. Have a great holiday. And thank you very, very much for being here. Good night to all.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks so much.